I'll take a quick look at one way you might score this question. Here was the answer. The distribution of dead trees skewed to the right and has a center around 1. Most of the data is from 0 to 4 trees. There's an outlier at 14 to 15. That's pretty close to what I said. I gave a bigger spread on that. The scoring, he said if you got all 5 things, center shape, spread, unusual observations, and context, you got a essentially correct. Otherwise, you got a partially correct. For the next one, interpreting it, to get an essentially correct, you have to be correct and include context. If you don't include context, the best you could get is a partial. And if it doesn't describe something about distance from the mean, then the best you can get is a partial. So if you say something like the standard deviation is the typical deviation, but you don't say from the mean, the best you can get is a partial on that part. Letter C, we've got clusters. Stating that it's a cluster, giving the advantage and the disadvantage will give you an essentially correct. If you only do 2 of those, you can get a partial. If you talked about stratifying with really good explanation of why it's stratified, which it's not, but you could get a partial out of that if you compared it correctly to a simple random sample. The estimate here, now you remember I put 53 on there. They're not going to be nitpicky on that because it was reading from a graph. So it's not like an error on my part. I just didn't see it that way. So that's why he said work shown with a reasonable answer is going to give you an essentially correct, whether it's a percentage, a fraction, a decimal. But if you use a normal curve or a binomial or something, you don't get any points because it wasn't normal and it wasn't binomial. It was very right skewed. Letter E, this one was not correct. You'll recall this part was not here. So this answer is, I think it was 0.996. And they said they gave full credit with work for an essentially correct, partially correct if you recognize there was a complement going on here, but you didn't get it right for some reason. For F, you've got to say it's a random sample. The 10% rule is met and the count is large. If you did 2 out of 3 of those, you could get a partial correct. Now remember, this is just one teacher's interpretation of how a grading rubric might be, because it's going to be different this year, but this is very reasonable and based on history with the College Board.